You probably think that Aled Lass and I are going to fall in love or something since he is a boy and I am a girl. I just wanted to say, we don't. Hey guys, so today I'm going to be reviewing Radio Silence by Alice Oseman. So this book is a YA contemporary. It's about 496 pages, at least the version that I have is. And it was published in February of 2016, so it's been quite a while, and I wish I had read it in 2016 when it had been released, but I digress. And it took me about a week to read it. And how I read it between the physical, the ebook on Scribd, and then the audiobook. And I loved all the versions, right? But the audiobook in particular, I loved listening to during the sections that have the podcast excerpts, which I'll get more into later. So about this book. So this book follows Frances, who is a study machine, right? She is academically excellent, and she, is the head girl of her school and all of that. And she's been doing all of this. She's been studying so hard with the one goal in mind of going to Cambridge University. Then there's Aled, and Aled is a straight-A student. He's timid, he's quiet, and the only real notable thing about him is that his twin sister, Karis, disappeared. She ran away 18 months prior to the beginning of the book. And that's like the only thing people really associate with him, aside from him being an A student and being quiet. And the book really takes off whenever Aled and Frances become best friends, and Frances discovers that Aled runs this podcast that she is obsessed with named University, like a universe and then city. And everything comes crashing down eventually because the book needs to have conflict, it needs to have a plot. And Aled and Frances's friendship is tested, trust is broken. It's all very dramatic and wild and crazy. And Frances is forced to confront her past and her guilt with Karis's disappearance, and what it means to be a friend, and how to come to terms with the death of a dream, in which you find out what you've always wanted, what you've seen yourself doing with your life isn't necessarily what you need to do with your life, and what you need as a person, which all wonderful, all great. Freshman year, sophomore year, me would have greatly benefited from reading this book. That says all you need to know about this book. I gave it 5 out of 5 stars, and I'm going to begin this review by doing a cons section because I feel like that is a lot smaller than my long list of pros, and I feel like even my list of pros is definitely missing stuff out. You can't get everything into this. So yeah, my con. So it took me about 50 pages, which is not that long. It's not that long, bear with me. It took me about 50 pages to get into this book, but up until that 50-page mark hit, I was contemplating putting the book down. Like, if you're picking this book up and you find yourself wanting to put it down in the first handful of chapters, just stick with it. And then also, I know some people might find Frances to be a bit much, her personality, and her, just her in general, which I didn't have an issue with. I loved Frances. I see a lot of myself in Frances, so that wasn't a problem for me, but this is a character-driven book and you spend a bulk of the time in Frances's head, so if you find Frances to be annoying or something, then I can't really help you there. I didn't relate to that. It might be a con for some people, and I've heard people say, oh, Frances was a bit much. Now onto the long list of pros. So the first thing I want to talk about is the writing style of this book. So this is a book that centers on a teenager, right? A little teen, and it's in her head, it's in first perspective. The story is being told, filtered through her, mind. The book was so refreshingly written. It was like I was talking to an actual teen. Like, it felt so genuine, it felt so connected, it felt so grounded, and stuff that Frances would say would be something that I would say, or a friend of mine would say. It was so authentic in the way that it was written, and some of the parts were very funny and other parts were very heartbreaking, and it all felt very true to what a teenager would do and what a teenager would experience. And as much as I love John Green, that is not something you can say about the bulk of his books. The Fault in Our Stars in particular is known for being so out there. It sounds like a middle-aged white man is writing and a teen girl just happens to be there. So yeah, the writing, solid. The next thing I really wanted to tackle on is the podcast. So this book centers on a podcast named University, like I mentioned earlier. I lived for the little excerpts that were put in this book that dealt with the podcast, what Radio Silence was saying or what was going on in the book, or even more than that, outside of the little sections that come from the podcast. I adored the collaborative effort between Aled and Frances that went into the podcast, what it meant not only as a podcast that's interesting in and of itself, but what it meant for their friendship too. And I adored how when I finished this book, everything that had happened in the podcast took on a different filter. You know, I could view it through a different lens. I love podcasts in general. I listen to podcasts all the time. I always recommend them to my friends, and none of them listen to them, but that's whatever. But yeah, I really adored that this book had a podcast at the center of it, and the podcast was interesting, and more than that, it like meant something substantive. Like it meant something to Frances and Aled. Yeah. So the next thing I loved about this book was friendship, the way that friendship was explored. Both as a theme and then also how it like actually played out in the book in details. So thematically, I feel like this book really showed the multifaceted nature of friendship, which is heavily neglected in YA. If there is friendship, it's usually tertiary to the plot. It's not that important. The friends are one-dimensional. They either serve the purpose of like moving the plot along, or they're the comic relief, or they're like the third leg in a love triangle, or they're there to urge the main character to get with the love interest or whatever. They're just there to be a convenient plot device, as opposed to being a relationship in and of itself to be cultivated and written out properly. But that's not the case in this book. That's definitely not the case. This book shows friendship in all of its glory. You know, we have the honeymoon phase at the beginning of the book, in which Aled and Frances, they stay up all night talking to one another, and they're best friends and they're inseparable. They spend the entire summer together. And then there is the hard work that goes into maintaining a friendship, in checking up on your friend, in, you know, working out through fights and all of that. And then also the book all demonstrates like how devastating a friendship breakup can be. I remember crying countless nights because I got into a huge fight with one of my friends, or, you know, one of my friends said that they wouldn't speak to me, or whatever it may be. And even now, the friendships that I have, they're so dear to me. They mean so much to me. And just, I feel like this book did that justice, did the beauty of friendship justice. It's not just something that is, you know, third fiddle. Is that even a saying? It's not something that's just like, just there. It's something that is unique and important and needs to be explored more, and is essential in becoming a well-rounded, emotionally healthy adult. So yeah, friendship as a theme, beautiful. Between Aled and Frances in particular, fantastic. Chef's kiss. Mwah. Wonderful. I loved Aled and Frances. Their friendship was so fantastic. Like, they just had a lot of friendship chemistry, and you know, I thought of them as my children. I was like, I want my children to be okay, even though they're kind of the same age as I am. My favorite part of their friendship was how they're so similar yet so different. You know, Frances is so loud in their friendship, and Aled is so quiet, but they're so similar too at the same time. It's so bizarre, but it works so well. I digress. Yeah, it's well done. It's a well done friendship. Another thing that I wanted to talk about in my prose column are parents. So Osman shows two different parenting styles in this book, and the juxtapositioning of Frances's relationship with her mom and Aled's relationship with his mom, top tier. Parenting is so important, especially in your young adult period of time, your adolescence, and it's also notoriously unexplored in YA, you know, unless if your parent is either extremely neglectful or they're dead. That's the two extremes, you know, or like you have like a chill relationship with them, they're like a cool mom. But yeah, Aled and Frances had very, very wildly different experiences with their parents, and both of them were so interesting and insightful, and I adored Frances's mom and I hated Aled's mom. And you know, there's one scene in particular, if you've read the book, you know, it's the scene with the scissors. I cried. I had to put the book down after it happened, and I bawled at like 3 a.m. Yeah, so the parenting in this book, so interesting, so fantastic. Next, and there is a subplot surrounding Carrie, Aled's twin sister. I think I touched on it earlier in the summary, but Aled's twin sister runs away from home 18 months prior to the beginning of the book. Karis and Frances were best friends prior to that. They rode the train together, they like talked, whatever. You know at the beginning of the book that Frances harbors a lot of guilt surrounding Karis's disappearance and where she went and why she left, and you know, it was such an intriguing part of the book, why Karis left, where she is, all of that. And I just adored it. I love a good mystery. Karis' subplot, fantastico. Oh, something I forgot to mention, friendship. So friendship is a huge theme in this book, right? And there's the friendship between Aled and Frances central in this book, but there are also other friendships, like Frances's friendship with Daniel and her friendship with Rain and their relationship with Aled, and it's just, they're a whole gang by the end of the book. They're a whole gang, and I adored them and I love them and I just want them all to be okay. I really thought that it was well done, particularly Daniel and Rain too. I mean, all of the characters are so fleshed out, you know, they all have their positive traits and their negative traits, and they feel like actual human beings. Like I feel like I could search up, you know, Aled or Rain or Daniel or any of them on Facebook and be able to friend them and see, you know, that they're actual people, because they felt so realistic. So yeah, I forgot to mention that earlier when I talked about friendship, because I was gushing about Aled and Francis. But yeah, there were other friendships in this book, and there are even like surface level friendships, and it's a huge source of anxiety for Francis, how she feels like she's not authentic with any of her friends towards the beginning of the book, and I feel like that's something that we can all relate to. But yeah, next I want to talk about the themes in this book. So the first thing that I want to mention is this book deals a lot with education. The podcast is named University. The book takes place around the time in which Frances is applying for college, and she really wants to get into Cambridge, and you know, all of the characters in this book have different relationships with the education system and what they hope to be in the future, and you know, how good of a student they are and how much stock they put into their identity as a student. But also, education is such an anxiety-inducing thing, and it's so important. It's overly important. The idea of you being a good academic student is key to you living a fulfilling life, which is not true. You know, we put too much stock in this idea that you have to go to university, you have to go and get this degree, you have to do that, and that, you have to get an office job and work these hours, and that's how you live a fulfilling life, that's how you're seen by society as a success. And this book completely challenges that notion. And then also there was a discussion around privilege and emotion. I don't know how to word this. There is a discussion in this book about privilege and opportunity, and it was such a fascinating discussion. For example, University talks about how the school system drains people of their passion, drains them of their like desire. They make them robots, essentially. You know, we're all cogs in a machine, and it's definitely critical of the education system. However, a discussion pops up in which people are like, well, isn't that insanely privileged, you know, to say that you hate the system that you're partaking in? You have the opportunity to go to university, you have the opportunity to be educated. That's something that people would definitely die for. You know, that's what people immigrate for, start their lives over for, the ability to learn and grow and have the opportunity to hold a degree and say, I can do this, and have doors open for them as a response. And so that the discussion around mental health and education and the way the system is ran, as opposed to, you know, whether or not people have the right to complain because they have the opportunity to begin with, was definitely an interesting one. And I loved that it was presented in this book on multiple occasions. Like, it wasn't just one occurrence, it kept coming up. It was a recurring theme. Mental health, yes. Content warning for this book. This book definitely delves into depression and suicide, like suicidal thoughts a bit. So if you're sensitive towards those things, I would not recommend you pick this book up just yet. But hopefully you get to the point in which you're able to pick this book up and read it and not be triggered by the material of it. And then fan entitlement. So fan culture was definitely a big part of this book, because University is a podcast that may not be the biggest in the world, but it definitely has like a Tumblr community dedicated to it, and it definitely has like people speculating about it. So fandom, fan culture, fan art, fan entitlement is all discussed in this book, and I feel like that online aspect definitely goes a long way to make this book feel young and unique and refreshing and authentic to the teenage experience. And yeah, so that's a very incomplete, probably, list of things that I liked about this book and why I ultimately gave it 5 stars, or 5 out of 5 stars. And before I end this little video, I just wanted to say that this book, I'm reading it now at 19 years old, in which I feel confident in who I am. I know where I'm going, and I know that can definitely change at, you know, the drop of a hat, but I feel confident in who I am. But there was a time, and I have wonderful friends. I have wonderful friends that I love and adore. But there was definitely a time in which I didn't feel any of those things. There was a time in which I felt alone, and my only solace were books that I adored and online communities that I took part in, and, you know, fan fiction that I read. And I had friends, but they all felt like surface level friends, and I felt uncomfortable with who I was and in expressing my emotions. And I feel like this is a book that I definitely needed, you know, when I was younger, and I still love it now. Like, I love this book now, but I definitely could have benefited from reading it when I was 14, 15, even 16. We're so often told that our emotions, or why am I saying we? I'm almost 20. I'm definitely not like a youngin in the adolescent realm. But teenagers are so often told that their emotions are a result of their hormones, and you know, everything feels like the end of the world, but it's not, and that's true, you know? Everything does feel like the end of the world. But emotions may, you know, come from a small thing, but that doesn't make them any less real, and that doesn't make them any less important. And Frances in this book is having like a bad day. Things are not going her way, and she has this line in this book that I put the book down and I wanted to freaking applaud. I wanted to cheer. I wanted to throw roses at her like she was in a play. But yeah, so she goes, "I'm sure you think I was complaining about nothing. You probably think that I'm a whiny teenager. And yeah, it was all in my head. Probably. That doesn't mean it wasn't real. So fuck you all." Yes, queen, go off, go off, go off, girl. Yeah, so just that. So yeah, that was my definitely not well done review of Radio Silence by Alice Osman. So yes, that is my review. Pick this book up, and I'm definitely looking forward to reading other books by this author. Yeah, sorry for the messy review, but there you go. I've been Sarah. This is Read with Sarah. Thank you for watching.